Okay, everyone, we are going to get started with our webinar today. Thank you all so much for joining. Really excited to dive into the action framework with you today. Just some quick introductions to start off. So my name is Chris Stern. I'm a pre-sales engineer here at Skuid. And the action framework is honestly my favorite part of Skuid, so I'm pretty excited to be on this call in particular. It really allows you to do some pretty extraordinary things without the need for writing code and being able to do a lot of complex actions and kind of behind the scenes even business logic without needing to write custom code. And so when I work on proof of concepts or tailored demos in my role as a pre-sales solutions engineer, I leverage the action framework heavily and really enjoy how powerful it is and how quickly I can configure and build applications that do pretty cool things. And then with me today as well, who'll be doing the majority of the demoing is Zach. So Zach, if you want to intro yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Zach McElrath. I've been with Skuid since we started the company, and currently working as principal developer advocate. So doing things like this and interacting with all of our wonderful Skuid builders to try to make you guys successful at what you do with Skuid. All right, so just for those of you maybe somewhat new to Skuid, we're just going to take like 30 seconds to a minute to just summarize what Skuid is. Skuid is a platform for letting you rapidly develop and run applications that run in the browser as well as in native mobile. We released back in the fall the ability to build apps that run on iOS or Android as well with Skuid, but definitely apps that run in the browser. I think some of the key value props of Skuid are that it helps you accelerate your building. You can create data models visually, connecting to data from various data sources, and then you can rapidly build out business logic on top of that. That's kind of what we're going to talk about today, is how you can add logic to your applications. You can theme them, brand them, and bring together the data into various UI components. We think one of the key pieces that makes that fast is that it's declarative to build. You're not writing code for everything. You're able to point and click to say, I want to show this data, I want to show that here, I want it to do this when I click on this button, I want it to look this way with our point and click tools. Kind of what we mean by declarative. You're not generating code, you're creating Skuid pages that ultimately produce apps. But for the coders out there, you are able to extend at certain points with JavaScript, and that is a value prop. You're able to create custom components as well as just extend in certain places where it makes sense. You can extend. But with Skuid, the Skuid platform, we also are trying to help you scale. Building out really complex applications with code doesn't scale. It gets very, very complicated very quickly. Skuid is built for scale. We have lots of tools that help you not just build faster and maintain it more easily, but the actual runtime is built for scale. And in terms of one of the props is just connecting to that data. That's a lot of the time when you're building apps is spent connecting to APIs and the data, and then connecting that to the components in the UI. Skuid makes that a few clicks versus hours, days of coding. And we connect to a few data sources very well, and the connections are quick to set up. So let's talk about some of the key building blocks of the Skuid platform and how the action framework fits into that. So first of all, with Skuid, there's models. Models are a abstraction layer that lets you take certain data from a data source and then bring that into your apps that you're building. Now with Skuid, your apps run all in the browser, which then gets in native mobile apps is running in kind of a hybrid container within your apps. But the models are really kind of the glue between your data sources, where your data is stored, and then the components in the UI. Models send data to and from the data sources, and then to and from your components. Components are what you'd be familiar with, like a tab set, a form, kind of a header, things like that, wizards. But they're very smart components. They're not components that you have to extensively code to get them to interact with your data and models. Skuid components kind of automatically are aware of the models that you've created and synchronize as you interact with the components. Like in a form, the models and the components live together, they synchronize, and they have lots of customizability. Now, actions is what we're going to go into today. This is our way of declaring how you want your app to function. Like when you click on a button or when something happens, you want this to happen, then this to happen. And ultimately with actions, we'll talk about the different things you can control. You're controlling primarily front-end application behaviors. So you're interacting with your components, you're interacting with your models, but you can also initiate processes in back-end systems of the data sources you have connected to. We'll talk about that. And I mentioned theming and branding. We have a design system studio, which lets you declare at a very fine-grained level the brand experience that your components are displaying in the user interface. It lets you tailor that to your brand guidelines and maintain consistency throughout your applications. And then we have an API. We've talked about that we can extend with JavaScript in certain points, but also for the Skuid platform, we have REST APIs, command line tools to help you interact with the places, to go beyond where Skuid ends declaratively and lets you extend and interact with it in that fashion. So today we're going to talk about actions. Okay, so let's jump into some of the key concepts. I would say there's really, with Action Framework, there's three key concepts. First is actions. So there's a variety of actions that we provide that let you do things like interact with data in your models, interact with the user interface, and as I mentioned, interact with server-side processes that are data source specific. We'll give some examples of that here in a bit, but actions are the kind of the lowest level building blocks when you're working with Action Framework. They're the things that actually do stuff in the user interface or in your models. So the next piece is logic. So you have these individual actions, you want to assemble them together into sequences. And you, like you would in coding world, you might want to conditionally run some of them based on formulas or logic. So if this is true, then I want to run these actions. Otherwise, I want to run different actions, or maybe I just want to stop the sequence of actions right there and move on. You also can invoke other sequences of actions. So there's ways of declaring sequences of actions, which are similar to functions in kind of a coding paradigm. And then you can, invoke them and reuse those sequences as well.
I'll add one thing there too that I've been using a lot lately, particularly with building forms or assessments. The ability there of the logic piece that Zach was talking about is great, because let's say you have a wizard, 4 or 5 steps in a process that you're walking a user through, and based on criteria that they are entering on step 1, maybe you actually need to take them to step 3 of that wizard and render particular fields based on values that they've input. Well, with the action framework and the logic, it's really easy to set that up. With Skuid, and you're just saying, hey, well, if there's a value in this field that's equal to X, then they need to navigate to step 3 of the wizard. But if it's equal to Y, then step 2, and so on and so forth. So I've just been using that a lot recently, and it's really fun, and it helps drive a really dynamic, intuitive experience for the end user, where they're not seeing fields that aren't relevant for them. They're just being directed exactly to what they need to see and interact with.
Yeah, that's awesome. The third piece of actions, the action framework really is triggers. So these are, how do you invoke sequences of actions? There's a variety of ways that you can do that from Skuid. Probably the most common one would be from clicking on a component, such as in a table, you could click on a row action, or you could click on a button. But there are other ways that you can invoke sequences of action as well. You can have them initiated based on model events. So for instance, whenever a certain field in a model is updated, like maybe they're changing users' email address, whenever that happens in a form, then I want to go perform this sequence of actions, like run a validation, or maybe I want to, something like that. Whenever a model is queried, I want to go query another model, or I want to or when I cancel a model, I want to create a new row in another model, things like that. There's lots of power there. You can also initiate action sequences based on hotkeys. So if I want to say, like, every time I say Control S, I want to save all my stuff, or maybe something, yeah, as you're moving through steps in a wizard, a lot of buttons can be, the buttons that perform actions in a wizard flow can be initiated by, the user pressing the keyboard. And some other more advanced ones, we also have voice enablement in Skuid. This is a relatively newer feature, but you can initiate sequences of actions based on voice commands. It's really powerful for mobile apps when you're on the go, or somewhere you just want to say, hey, I want to go. You could say things like search opportunities for something, or for Acme or something, or sort accounts by type, or sort of opportunities by close date, things like that. You can initiate Skuid action sequences with your voice. It's a powerful feature. Another thing we'll talk about today is events. Event communication is a very powerful way architecturally of organizing your Skuid applications, and having different actions being initiated by events that different pages publish is a great architectural pattern. We'll talk more about that. All right, so let's just go through quick some of the key types of actions in the action framework. When you're interacting with the user interface, you can show or hide modals or dialogues, depending on how you want to call those. Messages in the UI. You can pop out sliding panels. Those are a great feature that you can do. It's a kind of an alternative to modals. You can go to different URLs or different Skuid pages. You can toggle a component on or off. If you want to hide a button or hide a whole area of the page, you can just do that with a toggle component action. And then there's various component specific actions. So like you say, I want to have this wizard go to step 3, or go to some other particular step, switch a form to edit mode. There's lots of different ones there. When interacting with model data, there's a lot of ones that are just kind of they correspond to the standard model actions: creating a new row, updating rows, change the values, marking a model row for deletion, so that when you go save, that row, or maybe multiple rows, will then be deleted in the database. You can do that. So saving, this is an action where it's actually this is one of the few interactions that actually interact with the database. When you do a save, it goes and connects to your data sources of records and commits changes that you made in your models. Canceling kind of clears out models to what their original state was. Adopting rows is a cool one, where you can move data between models. You kind of take some in one model, move it to another. Then there's various actions for querying for model data. So activating conditions. So that could be like a where clause if you're connecting to SQL, or lots of different data sources, kind of filtering down what data you want to get from a data source in your model, changing the value of a condition, initiating queries. You can also sort models with an action. So change what the sort is by status or close date or something like that. And searching models, you can initiate that through action. So lots of powerful stuff you can do on the model layer. Now, data source actions are specific to a particular data source or record that you're connecting to. These let you initiate, very dependent sorts of functionality. So for instance, in Salesforce, you can invoke a flow. That's kind of Salesforce's declarative backend process engine. You can run code on Salesforce with invocable Apex, submit records for approval, locking records, post to Chatter, and Salesforce's social platform, sending emails, and then with various other data sources that have similar kinds of functionality. Like with our Outlook data source, you could send an email message with Outlook. With Amazon email services and notification services, you can send emails, notifications. With Amazon Lambda is a very popular framework for running arbitrary kind of code just on demand. You can kick that off from Skuid, run a Lambda function that way. Google Drive, creating files. We have similar things here for Box and just there, creating folders. So various actions depending on data source that you can initiate from your Skuid applications that they aren't happening inside your browser. The actions are happening on some other data sources, platform, but you're kicking them off from Skuid. So making that data source useful for your users in their apps. And we also have various functionality that really applies for mobile apps related to geolocation, things like getting the user's location, driving distance, addresses and maps, opening up a map and going to an address, push notifications. So those are only really relevant if you're doing native mobile app development. Now, when we talk about sequences of actions, let's just cover this going back to this. This is a key concept. Action sequences are a way of letting you define named sets of actions that you can then go run either through one of the various triggers, or another action sequence can call a different action sequence. You can kind of link them together. And these allow you to reuse your logic. So you don't have to define the same sequences of things various places in your application. These are kind of a central place for defining series of actions that you want to run. As part of this, one of the really powerful features is the ability to declare inputs that that various trigger points can provide different values for the inputs. For instance, maybe one button says I want to pass in an input of saying I want to go call this sequence with one value or one model name or a field or something. And then another trigger point might send in a different input to the same sequence. And the sequence can be dynamic in what it does, which actions it runs, what models it interacts with, lots of cool stuff there. We talked about being able to branch, and for branching, you define a formula using Skuid's formula syntax to say, like, if this is true, if this formula evaluates it true, then I can run one series of actions versus another. All right, now I want to talk about event-driven architecture. I'm going to give an example of this here in the demo section, but this is a really powerful way of leveraging actions and kind of stitching them together when you're building larger apps. So Skuid has a concept of an event bus. Some of you guys may be familiar with the concept of pub sub or publish subscribe patterns of basically different parts of your app can publish an event. So they could say things like, I created a new order, or I want to close all dialogues, or something like that. Those could be different events that you can then have various subscribers to. So a subscriber can say, okay, hey, whenever the close all dialogues event is published, I'm going to go close this dialogue that I have defined over in this page, or maybe a different page has another dialogue defined, I'm going to close that. Or whenever someone says maybe there's a refresh data event, and so one page might say, hey, I've got these 3 models showing tasks and events, I'm going to refresh those models. Whereas another page that you have defined that's also visible and open might have different data. So this is a way of kind of making various pages be able to interact with each other through a kind of this it's kind of a loose coupling, like saying these call them topics that various pages can respond to. And then where this really becomes powerful is with Skuid, you can define event-triggered action sequences. Events can be a trigger. And you can have a sequence of actions run whenever a specific topic is published. So if I say order, some trigger says order created, then I can go run a sequence of actions in various pages that respond to that and maybe update their UI, go requery models, something like that. And just like with other action sequences, you can have events can have parameters passed to them, which become inputs into that sequence. So it's a way of kind of passing not just that a given thing happened, but maybe some data about that thing. So if I have an order created event published, I could provide the order name, the order amount, the number of items, the quantity, and then various pages could handle that information differently. So it's a very powerful pattern for cross-page interaction. Okay, I think one more concept for the actions before we go into demos. It's really important, and that's context. So context is an important concept in Skuid more broadly, but with action sequences, each one that you define when you're running a sequence of actions. So user clicks on a button called save or next step. That initial trigger point defines kind of an initial point of context that the rest of the actions in the sequence can react or take advantage of. They can read from that context, they can modify it, and use that to inform what you do in that sequence. So for instance, when you click on a row in a table, that particular row gives context to that row action. So if the row action says, let's get back to this one, or math actions all have, there may be multiple rows in context. And then based on that, your actions might want to go update a value. So we'll show an example of that here in a second, kind of make that more tangible. But some actions, going to show an example of updating are context aware. They could say, take all the rows that are in context and run this action for all of them. Okay. Now, the last thing I'll touch on before we get to the demos is just the fact that you can extend action sequences and interact with them with JavaScript, which is a really powerful thing for folks with, some JavaScript it's been around for a long time. It's, de facto language of the web. You can extend with skills you already have as a coder. You can interact with Skuid's declarative functionality. So for instance, if you want to have a snippet that does something like computing sales tax, you can register a snippet, and Skuid makes this really easy to do, that will take in some data from the context of wherever this snippet, you want to run this snippet action within your sequence. You can take in the context, model, the row, and then it can run some logic on it. Go figure out, hey, based on that, I'm going to go run this crazy calculation. Might be kind of nuts. And I'm going to go then maybe do I'm going to update a sales tax field or something like that, maybe a discount, something like that, or a final price. And these actions can also be asynchronous. This is a really powerful thing. This is getting a little bit technical, but just want to kind of throw this in here for anyone who's got some background in development. You can kick off server-side logic, like maybe I want to go to an API, take some data from the sequence, call an API, get some data back, and then I want to go, update my sales tax field. And various Skuid model actions like saving and querying, those are also asynchronous, which means that the browser stops, waits for the data source or the API to come back with data, and then it moves on. So the sequences will wait. They'll stop and wait for that data to come back, and when it comes, then they'll move on. And if there's an error, they also can go into an error sequence. So actions have a concept of error actions, which you can kind of branch off and take a different sequence if there was an error. So the last thing on this JavaScript extensibility piece here is that you can kick off action sequences from JavaScript. So if you've named your sequences, each sequence gets a unique ID, which is a really safe way to refer to them. It's just not as pretty, but you can also get them by name and then pass in various inputs. So I would, maybe I have a modal where I let a user build a quote as part of like a configure price quote example. And I want to just be able to kick that off from various trigger points with different source opportunity IDs that I'm going to do the quote wizard based on. Well, if I define an input called opportunity ID, then those various triggers can pass that data in. Or maybe I want to hide certain parts of that quote builder, like a discount options section. I can just say, hey, for this place, I'm going to say just show discount options true. Let the user see that and do that. Maybe another place I want to have it not be there. All right, so there's a lot of kind of intro material, but let's go into some demos.
And so as Zach pulls up the demos, if any of you all have questions as he's going through this presentation, feel free to type them in at the Q&A portion of the Zoom webinar. And we're going to save 5 to 10 minutes at the end here to answer those questions. But feel free to type those in as we go. We'll get those. and then we'll work on answering as many as we can here at the end. So we're going to demo now for the next probably 30, 35 minutes or so, or 20, 25 minutes or so, and then we'll just save some time at the end. So Zach, take it away.
All right, thanks, Chris. Okay, so for this first one, I'm going to show how we can make a row action here on a table of open tasks. I'm going to have a row action that lets me easily mark the task as completed and kind of get it out of the list. So the goal would be to mark this, change the status of this task to be completed, and then I want to update my list so that, because it's supposed to just show open tasks, I don't want it to show that one anymore. I kind of want to clear it out. So pretty simple action, but I think it'll give us a good sense of just some of the key initial things you got to know about actions. So let's jump into our page. So here is our list component, which has here's our subject and our status fields, and here's our row action. So with most of the component-based trigger points, oh yeah, let's blow up the page a little bit. It's a little small. Okay. One nice thing that if you don't know about this in Skuid, the little arrows here, super helpful. These let you kind of blow up the properties pane so you can see a whole lot more stuff. You can collapse it, or if you want to hide it entirely and just go through your page, little tips and tricks. Very helpful. So a lot of these user interface-based trigger points like buttons and row actions have an actions panel up in the top right of the properties. And this is kind of where you start defining your action sequences. Now, before I go too much into that, I want to call out the difference. There's really two different places where you can define sets of actions that get run. Various trigger points, like a button, you can just define actions kind of one-off here that are not reusable across various other trigger points. So technically, this isn't an action sequence, but if you want to define reusable sequences, those are defined over here in the action sequences area. So this page has a lot of different action sequences on it. And these are kind of like, here you can kind of scroll through to see the different actions that they do. These are named sequences of actions. So this one kind of shows a pop-up, and then it does various things. Okay, so let's go back. But let's go back to our little complete action over here. Okay, let's go to actions. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at the action types. So I kind of walked through some of these earlier, but they're kind of categorized by some of the categories I went through. The first thing I want to do is go do an update row. Now I'm looking here at tasks. So I'm going to pick my action, or I'll pick my model that I want to row on and that I want to make the update on. And notice how I have this action type is context aware. Like I said, I want to update the rows in context. For a row action, that's just one, the particular row I'm looking at that action is associated with. But for a mass action, this could be 10, 100, whatever number of rows that you might have selected with some checkboxes in the table.
And one thing just to point out and add here is as Zach's choosing, which model, what's really powerful about that is you can trigger an action in another model from like this list. So this list is on a model that's looking at it happens to be looking at the task object in Salesforce. It could be objects in Salesforce or tables in a SQL database or whatever it may be. And you could contextually fire off an action from that task object that actually updates some rows maybe over in a contact object or in a different table in SQL or something like that. So the flexibility there to choose not only what launches that action, but then where those actions are taking place in is really, really cool and really, really powerful. Sorry, I love that.
No,
just used that yesterday, so it's top of mind, but go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So for this this update action, we're only going to update one field. We could update multiple fields if we wanted to, but I just want to change the status of this task to be completed. So there we go, we'll make it completed. And then I want to save, which will actually commit this change to the data source of record. There goes our tasks model. And then once that's done, I want to do two things. First is I want to query my list so I get kind of new data in. So let's requery it. And then I want to show a little message just so that I kind of have some visual indication to the user that that happened with something. So I'm going to show message action. I'll say task completed. I'll make it display. So there we go. So that's a pretty basic action sequence I just did. There's 4 actions, and you notice there's kind of a common, there's a combination of model changes that I'm doing, and then some UI stuff. So like showing a message, and that's it's very common with action sequences. They're doing a combination of interacting with your Skuid models, but also with the UI. Okay, so now let's preview this, see if it works. All right, so here's our tasks. So here I've got this one. I'm going to say this one's completed. All right, cool. So we completed it. Now it's going to go get me some more of I have lots of these waiting on someone else tasks. Let's go through and complete this one. All right, now so that one's going to clear it out of the list, and I can kind of bang through and go knock these out, and getting my little messages down there. So that's pretty quick example. Another thing that I could actually have done if this was a list where I didn't really need to go back and query to get more, I could have also removed the row from the model and just kind of thrown it away. Like I've saved it, it's completed. Now I don't really want to be looking at my model anymore. And this is a little faster because I'm just throwing it out in the browser. Just to show what that looks like. It's kind of convenient. Just to kind of show a different example of a different action for this. So let's say I just want to get rid of this one. Complete it, it's gone. Complete it, it's gone. So the only time I'm waiting there is just while it's saving. So that's a pretty simple example of where I'm using the context from the row action to inform the actions that I'm taking in the sequence. All right, so the next kind of example I'm going to jump into is a little bit, the UI for this is not super pretty. Sorry about this, but I think this is an example of an event architecture example. So here I've got a list of credit card orders. Not super real, but I have these. Basically, here's the names of my orders, and then what I ordered, the amount that it cost me, and a transaction ID. So for this example, this is just kind of one page that's showing a list of my orders. But I want to have this little screen, so I'll show you this. I have a new order that kind of shows up in a modal here. This is a separate Skuid page. And because I want to be able to use this in different parts of my application, I've taken this wizard here for creating a new order, and I've kind of put it into a separate Skuid page. So now I want the 2 pages to talk to each other. So I'll show you how this goes. So I want to have I want to have a salad, and it's going to cost me $12.34. Very interesting. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now I can go submit the order. So you'll notice that once I did that, a few things happened. I've got a transaction ID back from my fake credit card processing service. I have some fake logic in Salesforce Apex that's generating a transaction ID, and could be calling out to a credit card processing API or something like that, but I'm not actually doing that. That's irrelevant, but I'm doing that, and then I can go back and I could buy another thing. So if I want to get some peanuts, here we go. Oh, you know what, that's the same exact, it doesn't really matter, but okay. So notice that underneath here, the list is updating. And I'm gonna show you how I did that. I'm not, this is a totally separate Skuid page. Oh, I got some weird little icons on my screen. That's cool. Oh, actually, it's not on it. Okay, never mind. So it's updating the list behind the scenes, and I'll show you how that's being done. Is I'm not having this button query a model. I'm actually just publishing an event, and then the other Skuid page is listening to that event, and it's querying its model. So this page doesn't have to know about all the different people out there in the world that want to use this page. I'm just firing an event, publishing an event, and then other people can listen to that if they care about it. So that paradigm is very, very powerful, very reusable for large scale apps or smaller scale apps. Now, the next thing I'm gonna do is when I say I'm all done, this is actually doing the same thing. It's publishing an event called close open dialogues. And because this button here is on the first page, the list page, it's the one that opens the dialogue. So it's the one that should be responsible for closing it. I'm just telling it to say, hey, I'm done with the dialogue. People who may have opened me, close me. So I'm kind of broadcasting these messages, and then the page can respond. So let me just show you how that's done. So here's my list page, and I've got this one just has basically one model with my order object. It's got a custom credit card order object, very exciting. And then I have a button. Now this button, all it's doing is showing a modal which has another Skuid page in it. So that's really all this page has in terms of that's what it's doing. But in the action sequences, this is where it's interesting. The first thing I have is I have a reusable sequence called reload orders model. And this one is actually a really simple sequence. It just goes in and requeries my orders from the data source. But because I did this here, I can call that from various other sequences. So I can call that from this button right here. I can have it do a refresh, and it can call that same sequence. So let's go to the run action sequence, and then it gives me a list of my reusable sequences, and it will go do that. I don't have to pick the model. It's just I want to go reload that model. So that's great. I can reuse that there, but I can also reuse that from other places as well. So here I've got an event triggered sequence. This one says whenever the event name order.created is published from any active pages, so any Skuid pages, I want to do something. I want to go run these actions. And here again, I'm just running this other action sequence. So I don't have multiple places where I'm defining the same logic. I'm just running the same sequence. So it allows you to have reusability and lets your app scale. You don't have to have the same logic repeated in multiple places. Okay, so I've got that set up. And I also can do it when the page is first loaded. I can say, show the page, and then as soon as the page first gets rendered, so I've got my title, my page title, and my table show up, but they don't have any data in them. I want to go load the data after the page first gets rendered. And again, I'm running that same sequence. I have now 3 different places. They're all invoking the same sequence. So they're all sharing that same logic. And then I have only one more interesting thing here, and that is that if I hear an event, if an event gets published called close order dialogues, and I actually want to change this to be from any active pages. So if another Skuid page publishes that, I want to listen to it. Now you can limit this to say, well, I only want to listen for events in my own page. Maybe there's some internal events you care about. You don't want to listen to somebody else's junk from somewhere else in the world. You can kind of like sandbox yourself and say, I don't care about anybody else's stuff, just my stuff. Another way of doing that is to use channels. Channels basically are a way of kind of like giving an extra level of specificity to the events, saying like, I only care about an event that's coming from, say, maybe my company name is Acme, or this area of my application is like sales, the sales part of my app. I don't care about, maybe there's a marketing app that I have in my Skuid. I don't care about that. I just want to care about these messages that are within the sales area. So you can publish that as well, publish to a specific channel. It's another way of specificity. Okay, so that's kind of how that's working. This page is just listening for events and then doing things. And then here's the Skuid page that actually makes the order. So it's got a button that first it does what I said. It runs a Salesforce action that goes and submits a credit card payment. Here it's going to take some data from a model, and it's going to go feed this in. So this is running a data source action. It's dynamically pulling from a list from this Salesforce org of custom Apex processes that these are all pretty simple examples, but in some environments you might have some really complex Apex logic that really makes sense to live in server side, and you can invoke that from Skuid declaratively with a data source action. So lots of power there. And these extra properties here are feeding inputs into that process. So I'm passing in the credit card number, name, and the amount, and then that goes up to my server-side process. Now, after that comes back, I'm going to take data, and this is, now I'll show you, this is actually a really interesting way of taking data from the previous action and leveraging it. So the result of this process, where I went to the Salesforce and called this Apex method, it gave me back a transaction ID. That was something that was provided by that data source action. I can go take that from previous action.result, and I can then go use that. I can populate that in my UI if I want to. So that's an interesting way of getting data from previous actions. Okay, after that's done, I'm going to go to the next step in my wizard. So this is using kind of a wizard wizard action. Go to a particular step. And then finally, I'm going to publish an event. So this is where I go broadcast and tell the world, hey, an order got created. If you care about that, you can do something about it. And I'm passing in some parameters so that if the person wants to, they can say, oh, what was the order on? Maybe it was, what type of order was it? Is it what's the amount? Maybe I only care about it if it was a high order amount. So being able to pass that data along is super helpful there. So once I've submitted that order, the other Skuid page is going to go listen to that, say, hey, yep, I care about that event, I'm going to do something. And then finally, this one, I'm going to publish a close order dialogues message. And this one, I'm going to publish it to all pages. So that is going to allow the other page to listen for it. Okay, so that's basically how that kind of event paradigm works. Hopefully that makes sense.
And our app composer has a light mode and dark mode. So just want to point that out. I know that's different than the last one you did, but yeah, you have the ability to choose if you want light mode or dark mode for your app composer.
Yeah, good call. That's kind of jarring. I'm in a different, this is a different environment. Back to the light. Whoa, jarring. Okay. Yep. Okay. So then I think one of the last kind of things I want to show. Yeah. So one of the last things I want to show, I want to talk about I'm going to talk about drilling chart drill downs. This is an interesting example of where you can take some more context and then make your apps more dynamic with the actions. So when I go to this dashboard here, I've got a chart of sales by region. When I click on a particular region slice, we're going to go load the sales just for that region. So getting all the countries, France, Germany, that are in that region. If I click on this one, it's going to load me different data from different region. And there's a lot of different ways a lot of different things we could do here. This is showing different like kind of drill down charts, but you could also pop out a list of detailed, like what information is feeding that chart. This is something people love doing with Skuid. Very powerful, being able to take the particular chart slice you clicked on and then grab just data that's relevant to that sales quarter or whatever else you're clicking on.
And Zach, too, I mean, if you pop that open again, one of the things that's cool here is it's connecting insights with action. So this has inline editing capabilities as well. Zach can mass update this table really easily. And what's powerful about this is instead of running a report and then taking that report and going somewhere else to take action on it, you have the ability to, in context, make those changes if you need to, and really start to blend that, like I said, that insight with action, as opposed to having two different places where you're trying to understand data and then going somewhere else. Skuid allows you to just blend that together and have that kind of comprehensive picture into what's going on and the ability to take action there. So, sorry, Zach.
No, absolutely. Yep. So I just wanted to quickly show how that's done. In the chart, we're going to go to the particular series that we care about. So here's the chart. Here's our series. Now I care about this particular series right here. Within chart series, you can add on-click actions. And the on-click actions let you say, hey, if I click on this, I want to go here. I'm doing something that leverages some merge syntax. I'm taking the region. I'm going to grab the region from the chart. This is kind of a weird syntax particular to charts, but I'm going to grab the region that I clicked on, and I'm going to feed that into a query against an SAP data model. And with that region passed into that condition, I'm going to go query the data, and then I'm going to show that over here in our other chart. So like we saw, that's the drill down, some of that drill down behavior. But I could also have, you know, a chart where I click on a category. I could have it go do query some model, and then this is a different way. Drill downs are kind of a different way where you can kind of link charts together in a particular set of charts. Like you could define your drill down charts, and then kind of go show the charts that way. So that's a powerful way of like saying, based on this context, I want to go grab related data. And that paradigm applies in a lot of different ways. Like if I want to go load data for a particular, say for a particular account, I want to go see related information about that one. Like let's go see just opportunities related to this particular account, Alpine Systems. Loading data in context is a super, super powerful feature of Skuid to be able to make these dynamic apps.
It's really performant too, because as you're using the action framework, you're only bringing in data, in this case, for Alpine Systems. So even though you're looking across, in this example, I think like 5 different objects in Salesforce, and then you're also bringing in data from SAP, we're only bringing in the data that the user's needing to see at this point, everything for Alpine Systems. And we're doing that through the action framework and model conditions. And that gets really powerful, especially when you're thinking about scaling these things out and how much data is typically that lift on a page load. Skuid can lessen that a lot by using the action framework and making sure, hey, when the user lands on the page, what is it they want to see? And let's just show them that. They don't need, you know, the data behind the scenes for all these other accounts that you see on the left. So you can not only improve the user experience from just what they're seeing and how they're interacting with it, but you can improve it too from just a speed perspective as well as they're moving through the application.
Absolutely. The last thing I want to show before we move on to questions is I just want to talk about branching logic. So just a few more minutes left. Good, we're almost there.
This is worth it.
Right,
I love branching logic.
So let's go back to our example of updating a row in the model. Now I want to be able to say, maybe for this particular task, I want to say, hey, you can't mark a task as completed if something isn't true. Like if you haven't put in like a next step, or maybe you don't have a certain type of, like if the status is something you don't want to do something, or, you know, so many different kinds of logic could follow this pattern. But to do that, we're going to add this branch. This is kind of a special type of action that lets you define some formula-based logic. So we've got our branch. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say that if a certain condition is true, we're kind of just going to stop the action and show an error message. We're going to say, hey, no, you can't do that. We could choose to say, do a lot of other things. We could show a dialogue, or we could run a different series of updates. But for this example, we're kind of going to do kind of a bailout scenario. So we're going to say, if this is true, then I'm going to show a message and basically end the sequence. I'm not going to proceed. So we're going to have it show as an error. We'll let it sit around for 4 seconds or maybe 10 so the user can kind of review it. It's like, oh, what just happened? It's like, oh, there was an error. Like and I'm going to say basically you can't mark completed a case or not a case, a task that has Zach's name in it. Very arbitrary, but here we go. So now for this branch action, some key important things. First, I'm just going to put a little description on it and say no Zach tasks. So just a little helpful indicator for you as you're scanning this to say, what the heck is this about? Why am I doing it? That's helpful for other people reviewing your page to know what's going on. Now, this is a really important one. This basically lets you say, after running this branch, do I move on to the rest of the actions, or do I bail out? And now the default is to kind of bail out and say stop right here. So that's what I want to do in this case. But if I wanted to say, hey, if this special case is true, I want to do these things additionally, you would say continue with the next action. So this is what you say, if this is true, then I want to go do A, B, C, D, E, and then go back to the original set. So that's really powerful. Here I'm just going to bail out. Now, the formula context model lets us say, I'm going to write the formula here in a second, but having a context lets me say, hey, in this case, I've got a row action. I want to take that row that I'm looking at, and I want to use that in my formula. Now I don't care about the other rows in the table. I just want this row. So by selecting a context, I can do that. If I didn't pick one, I wouldn't have that row in context, and I couldn't use that in the formula. So let's flip our formula here, and I basically want to say, I'm going to do a contains, and then I'm going to put in the subject of the task. I'm going to put Zach. So basically, if it contains Zach, then I'm going to bail. So that's a really simple formula. There's lots of different formulas you can use, lots of stuff there. See our formula editor docs to help you out with that, but that's just kind of a brief example of a branch action. If I want to add additional actions, they're called if true actions. Basically, if this formula evaluates the true, then I want to do these indented actions. Okay, so back to our page. Now, I forgot that I didn't make this editable right now, so I'm just going to say if status is waiting on someone else, that I can't complete it. That's actually what I forgot that I got rid of my let's say waiting on someone else. I forgot that I turned off the edit mode for this thing. Okay, no failing if waiting, or no completing if waiting. Okay, here we go. That's what I changed it up a little bit. Okay, so I got my tasks. So let's say, oh, okay, so there we go. I got my little error. I can get rid of it. Now, if I was going to go through here and find some other ones, that one I can complete it just fine because it's not waiting on someone else. So lots of stuff you can do there. You can do something based on the due date, whatever. The logic's up to you, but the functionality is the same either way. So you can kind of stop and then, yeah, do this one again. Okay, there we go. So that's just kind of a simple example of some branch logic based on the context. All right, so we've got a few minutes left for questions. I want to make sure we've got some time for that.
Definitely. Yeah, no, got a few questions here. If anybody else has additional questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A on the Zoom webinar, and we'll get those. We'll start answering as much as we can here in the remaining 5 minutes. First one is a question with regards to, so you showed a lot of action sequences and things here. If we were to try and create our own, where can we learn more about this? Is there documentation or tutorials, or how do we learn more about this?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. I wanted to end with this slide, but if you go to docs.skuid.com, search for actions framework or action sequences, that would be the best place to go. Kind of follow some of our tutorials. I think that's I would say go to our docs. It's a good place to start.
Awesome. Another question we've got is, do you have the ability to access or alter the lead conversion process in Salesforce through these action sequences?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we don't have a built-in action for doing lead conversion, but what I showed with the invocable apex or the run flow actions, I think both of those should allow you to invoke lead conversion. And yeah, it's a great idea for us having a built-in way to do lead conversion, but of course it is different company to company how you want that to work exactly. So you could perform a lead conversion using a apex, like a run apex action. That would be one way to do it, and then you can get back. In that case, it's totally possible to get back different outputs from that process. Or if you say you want to convert it and then to an account and a contact, but not create an opportunity or not create a task for follow-up. That's kind of up to you. And then, yeah, you could initiate that from Skuid. You could also do some really powerful things with Skuid. You could do is say, maybe there could be a button called convert, and then you could show it like a modal and have like some checkboxes that feed into the inputs to that process. So you could let the user pick some options and say, hey, I want to do this and then that, in this case for this lead, but not for another lead, and pass that into your action sequence as inputs. So you can make the lead conversion more dynamic versus just like, oh, it only ever works this one way. It only ever, so there's a lot of options there.
Nice. Another question is, can you use functions in formulas?
Use functions in formulas. So I'm trying to think, by functions. One thing you can do is, it is possible with our JavaScript API to extend with custom formula types. So it is possible to write. So Skuid has a lot of different formulas, everything from like contains. You can do model lookups to go find values in a model. You know, a lot of string,
case and month date.
Case, if, various things like that. Using functions. I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that, but you can write your own custom formula functions and use ours. Not sure if that's helpful, but
yeah, and I think this is answering the question, but I used a case function the other day where I needed to say, hey, if this particular field is equal to 1, like the number 1, then convert it to ONE, and if it's equal to 2, convert it to TWO, and that function then I can put in my formula, like in a formula field, and I can call that from the action sequence, and it can fire through there and then make those different conversions in the formula. So there's actually a lot you can do with formula fields and tied into formulas in the action sequence that Zach showed today that allow you to do really powerful things. And the functions, when you choose a particular function, like if you're wanting to convert a date time or a month or something like that, Skuid drops in sort of a template of what fields you need to put in where to have that function work correctly. So that's pretty cool. So we'll stop there. If you've got additional questions, please email them. Sorry we weren't able to get to everything today, but send us an email. Go to docs.skuid.com as well to learn more. And thank you so much for your time. Zach, you want to say any last words?
No, thanks. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming today. This will be posted online after the next few weeks. So stay tuned for future Skuid Dives.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of the day.